Imagine trying to gauge the processing power of a high-end computer, but the only diagnostic tool you have is a bathroom scale.
Right, you just put the laptop on the scale and try to guess if it can render 3D graphics based on how heavy it is.
Exactly. I mean, using a sheer measure of mass to determine complex internal performance makes absolutely zero sense.
Yeah, the tool is fundamentally mismatched to the reality you're trying to capture. You're measuring physical weight when you really should be looking at the internal circuitry.
And that disconnect between the primitive tools we use and the immense complexity of the human body is exactly where we are starting today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission for this session is to unpack this massive, comprehensive dossier of research on a condition that, as of 2022, affected over 1 billion people worldwide. We are talking about obesity.
Over a billion. It's really staggering when you look at the raw numbers.
It is. And the goal here is to move completely past that tired, oversimplified narrative of, just eat less and move more. We're going to look under the hood at the biology, the built environment, and the historical forces at play.
Because it's so much more than just a behavioral issue.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Because while obesity carries this heavy social stigma that you see everywhere, medical societies and organizations like the World Health Organization and the American Medical Association officially classify it as a complex chronic disease.
And that classification is the crucial starting line. But to truly understand obesity as a disease, we first have to understand how the medical community actually measures it when you're sitting in your doctor's office.
Which brings us back to the laptop on the scale.
Exactly. This is where your bathroom scale analogy comes in, because our primary diagnostic tool is shockingly flawed.
We're talking about BMI, right? Body mass index.
Yes, BMI.
If you've ever been to a clinic, you know the drill. They take your weight, your height, plug it into a ratio, and spit out a number.
And the standard classifications dictate that a BMI of 25 or higher is overweight, and 30 or higher is obese.
Though the research does note that some East Asian countries use lower thresholds, right? Because those specific populations tend to develop cardiovascular and metabolic risks at a lower total body mass.
Right, they adjust for regional risk factors.
Yeah.
But zooming out, using BMI to measure your overall health is basically like judging a car's engine performance strictly by how heavy the chassis is.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is just how glaring the blind spots of BMI truly are when you apply it to large populations. I mean, it completely ignores variations in tissue type.
Like lean muscle mass versus adipose tissue or fat.
Exactly. And the dossier gives us some incredible real-world stress tests of this metric. According to the standard BMI charts, more than half of all NFL players are classified as obese.
Wow.
And 1 in 4 are extremely obese. But their mean body fat percentage hovers around just 14%.
So you have these elite athletes in peak cardiovascular condition being flagged as medical emergencies on a standardized chart.
Right. The dossier highlights another perfect example, too, a study on college-aged sumo wrestlers.
Oh, I saw that. That was wild.
By strict BMI standards, these athletes are categorized as severely or very severely obese. But when researchers stopped looking at the weight-to-height ratio and actually measured their subcutaneous and visceral fat percentages,
What did they find?
40% of those wrestlers were no longer categorized as having obesity at all. They were just carrying a massive, incredibly dense amount of lean muscle.
So basically, the medical field has been using this really blunt instrument to measure a highly dynamic system.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
And that implies someone could look visibly overweight on the outside, but have, the metabolic engine of a sports car internally. The sources actually mention something called metabolically healthy obesity.
This is a major frontier in current medical research. We're finally moving away from treating everyone with a high BMI as a single monolithic group. The BioShare project actually developed very strict criteria to identify this subgroup. They found individuals with a BMI over 30 who do not exhibit the typical metabolic damage.
So no high blood pressure or anything.
Under their definition, these individuals have completely normal blood pressure, normal blood glucose, normal triglycerides, and healthy cholesterol levels.
Wow.
And all without taking any medications. So they carry the physical weight associated with obesity,
Yeah.
but internally, their cellular machinery is running perfectly smoothly.
That's incredible. But, while it's clear the metric is flawed and some people carry excess weight without immediate metabolic damage, the overarching data for the general population paints a very different picture.
It does. We can't ignore the broader trends.
Right. The health risks of excess body fat are undeniable. The statistics in this dossier are grim. Obesity causes at least 2.8 million deaths annually worldwide.
Yeah, at least 2.8 million.
And on average, it reduces life expectancy by 6 to 7 years. For severe obesity, that number drops by a full decade.
It remains one of the leading preventable causes of death globally. And that's primarily because it's linked to this massive web of secondary conditions or comorbidities.
The list is extensive. I mean, it was the single strongest risk factor for severe COVID-19 outcomes. It's heavily linked to osteoarthritis, depression, cardiovascular disease.
But the numbers for type 2 diabetes really jump off the page.
Yeah, excess body fat underlies 64% of diabetes cases in men and 77% in women. But let's look at the mechanism here. Because fat isn't just a passive storage locker for extra calories.
Right, it's not just sitting there doing nothing.
How is it actually causing this cascading damage across the body?
Well, it comes down to two distinct categories of harm. First, you have the mechanical effects of increased physical mass.
Look at the sheer weight compressing the airway.
Exactly, leading to things like obstructive sleep apnea, or the mechanical wear and tear on joints resulting in osteoarthritis.
That makes sense.
But the second category is chemical, and this is crucial. Adipose tissue, especially visceral fat. The fat around your internal organs is highly biologically active.
Okay.
It functions almost like a toxic endocrine organ, constantly secreting chemicals right into your bloodstream.
Wait, so the body thinks it's constantly dealing with an injury or an infection?
That is the exact biological response. The extra fat creates a chronic, low-grade inflammatory state.
Jeez.
It secretes inflammatory cytokines that travel through the body and physically block the insulin receptors on your muscle and liver cells.
So the insulin is knocking on the door trying to deliver glucose to power the cells, but the fat has effectively changed the locks.
That's a great way to put it. That is exactly how the massive spike in type 2 diabetes occurs.
And the dossier mentions it also creates a prothrombotic state.
Yes.
Meaning the blood itself changes consistency, becoming more prone to dangerous clotting, which obviously skyrockets the risk for strokes and deep vein thrombosis, those dangerous clots that form deep in the legs.
Right, so the body's inflammatory alarms are absolutely blaring.
But here's where it gets really interesting. I was reading through the clinical outcomes, and I hit this massive paradox in the data.
Yeah.
It's literally referred to in the medical literature as the obesity survival paradox.
Yeah, this phenomenon completely flips our standard understanding of weight and mortality on its head.
I mean, the data shows that in certain subgroups of patients, specifically people who already have heart failure or patients undergoing hemodialysis, meaning their kidneys have failed and a machine is filtering their blood,
Right.
having a higher BMI, specifically in the 30.0 to 34.9 range, is actually associated with lower mortality rates than having a normal weight.
It seems completely counterintuitive, right? You have a condition causing chronic inflammation, yet in these specific severe illness scenarios, it acts as a shield.
Yeah, how does that work?
Well, the data has consistently backed this up since it was first described in 1999. And the medical community maintains a few impartial theories to explain the mechanism here. One heavily supported theory revolves around the concept of metabolic reserve.
Meaning the fat is acting as a battery pack for a body under siege.
Exactly the case. Chronic severe illnesses like advanced heart failure or kidney disease naturally cause dangerous progressive weight loss and muscle wasting.
Right.
Having extra adipose tissue going into a severe illness provides an essential energy reserve. A person starting at a normal weight might quickly become critically underweight, frail, and unable to endure the physical toll of the disease or the heavy treatments.
Whereas the patient with obesity has the metabolic fuel to weather the storm.
Precisely.
Another theory mentioned is a sort of medical bias that accidentally works in the patient's favor.
Yeah, this one is interesting.
Heavy patients who suffer a cardiac event might actually receive far more aggressive, immediate medical treatment from doctors precisely because their weight is seen as a compounding, dangerous risk factor.
Right, which leads to better short-term survival rates. The medical intervention is just dialed up to a 10 immediately.
Wow. So if our biology views fat as this ultimate survival reserve during times of severe illness or famine, it makes total sense why the human body fights so aggressively to accumulate it and keep it.
It does. It's doing what it was designed to do.
This isn't just about someone lacking willpower at the dinner table.
Not at all. The Endocrine Society's official stance is really critical here. They formally state that obesity is a disorder of the energy homeostasis system.
Meaning the balance of energy in and out.
Right. The pathogenesis does involve a sustained positive energy balance, consuming more than you burn. But the core issue is that the body literally resets its internal set point to a higher weight.
And once the body establishes that new, heavier baseline, it views any attempt to lose weight as a threat to its survival.
Exactly.
So if you've ever tried a strict diet and felt like your own brain was sabotaging you, making you obsessive over food and feel lethargic, you aren't lacking discipline. Your brain literally thinks you are starving in the wilderness.
Yeah, and the medical field didn't fully understand the mechanics of this biological defense system until 1994, with the breakthrough discovery of a hormone called leptin.
Leptin is the messenger system, right?
Yes, it's produced by your fat cells, and it travels through the blood to act directly on your central nervous system.
Okay.
Specifically, a region of the brain called the hypothalamus, which acts as your metabolic control center.
Zooming in on the hypothalamus, the research describes these distinct neural circuits that control our urge to eat.
Right.
Think of the first group, the NPY and AGRP neurons, like a blaring fire alarm in a building. When they fire, your brain is convinced you're in an emergency starvation scenario, and all you can focus on is finding food. They hit the gas pedal for feeding.
Spot on.
Then the second group, the POMC and CART neurons, act as the system reset button. They silence the alarm, stimulate the feeling of being full, and tell you to stop eating.
And in a healthy system, when you have enough body fat, those fat cells release leptin. The leptin travels to the brain, presses the system reset button by stimulating the fullness neurons, and turns off the fire alarm by inhibiting the hunger neurons.
So if my fat cells are supposed to be telling my brain how much energy we have stored up, there must be a communication breakdown between the fat and the hypothalamus when someone develops obesity.
The messenger gets completely lost in transit. This is a condition called leptin resistance.
Oh.
The person has an abundance of fat cells, and those cells are screaming, pumping out massive amounts of leptin. But the brain's receptors are essentially deaf to the signal.
Wow.
Because the hypothalamus isn't receiving the leptin message, it assumes the body has absolutely no fat. The brain just leaves the hunger fire alarm blaring indefinitely.
That entirely explains the 98% failure rate of pure willpower dieting. You are trying to consciously outthink an unconscious survival alarm.
It's an impossible battle for most people.
And the dossier notes that genetics lay the foundation for this entire circuitry. If you are the offspring of two parents with obesity, you have an 80% chance of developing it yourself.
80%?
Yeah. If both of your parents are of normal weight, that probability drops to less than 10%.
The genetic predisposition is profound. Evolutionary biologists point to the thrifty gene hypothesis.
Right.
This theory suggests that human bodies evolved over millennia to hoard fat efficiently to survive historical famines.
Because food wasn't always available at a drive-thru.
Exactly. The genetic variations that made our ancestors excellent at storing calories allowed them to survive and pass on their DNA. The problem is, in the modern developed world, the famine never arrives.
But human DNA hasn't drastically mutated in the last 50 years. Yet, according to the World Health Organization, the global prevalence of obesity more than doubled between 1980 and 2014.
Yeah, a massive spike.
If our underlying genetic code is relatively the same as it was a century ago, something entirely outside of our bodies must be pulling that genetic trigger.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to examine the obesogenic environment. The modern world is perfectly engineered to clash with our ancient survival biology.
The caloric explosion in the global food supply alone is staggering. Looking at the data between 1971 and 2004, the average daily food energy consumed by U.S. women went up by 335 calories.
Right.
For men, it increased by 168 calories. And this wasn't an increase in complex proteins.
No, not at all.
The primary drivers were highly refined carbohydrates, specifically sweetened beverages and processed snacks like potato chips.
Sweetened drinks alone now account for almost 25% of daily food energy in young adults in America. We're drinking our surplus calories before our brain even registers we've consumed anything.
But the food supply is only half the equation.
Yeah, the physical built environment has fundamentally altered how human beings expend energy. In the early 2000s, researcher Lawrence Frank and his colleagues published these highly influential studies on community design.
Okay, what did they look at?
They objectively measured urban form, analyzing residential density, street connectivity, and land use mix to create a mathematical walkability index.
And they proved that our cities are actively changing our physiology.
Absolutely.
They found that a mere 5% increase in a community's walkability index was associated with a 32.1% increase in active time spent walking or biking.
Which correlated to a measurable reduction in BMI across that entire population.
We've literally engineered movement out of our daily lives through mechanized transport, sprawling suburbs, and desk-bound digital labor.
And beyond the obvious culprits of cars and calories, the research outlines a network of invisible environmental drivers.
Invisible drivers.
Yeah. Chronic lack of sleep fundamentally alters those hunger hormones we discussed. And there is exposure to obesogens, synthetic chemical compounds found in plastics and pesticides that act as endocrine disruptors, artificially signaling the body to store fat.
Wow. And the medical interventions themselves can also be drivers.
Oh, definitely.
Certain widely prescribed medications, particularly atypical antipsychotics used for mental health conditions and various antidepressants, cause massive weight gain.
And this isn't just because they make a patient lethargic.
Right. These drugs actively alter the histamine and serotonin receptors in the brain that regulate satiety, sending the patient's appetite into overdrive while simultaneously shifting how the body metabolizes lipids.
But the most cutting-edge invisible driver in the dossier focuses on the microbiome. The trillions of gut bacteria living in your digestive tract actually differ significantly between lean individuals and those with obesity.
Wait, really? So you and your coworker could eat the exact same healthy salad, but because of the specific bacterial ecosystem in your gut, your body might extract significantly more calories from that identical meal.
Yeah, the mechanism is incredible. Certain strains of bacteria that are dominant in the gut flora of individuals with obesity are essentially super harvesters.
Super harvesters.
Yeah, they're highly efficient at breaking down complex, otherwise indigestible plant fibers into short-chain fatty acids, which your intestinal wall can suddenly absorb and store as excess energy.
That is wild.
There's even an emerging field of study called infectobesity, which tracks how certain common adenoviruses might alter cellular metabolism and contribute to weight gain. It's an effect observed across both humans and several animal species.
So when you lay it all out, our biology hoarding fat, our cities preventing us from walking, our food packed with processed sugar, and even our gut bacteria betraying us, it forms a perfect storm.
It really does.
It makes you wonder how society actually views the human bodies caught in the middle of this storm, because the historical context in this dossier shows a massive psychological shift.
Yeah, for the vast majority of human history, mankind's primary overarching struggle was food scarcity.
Right.
Because of that reality, for thousands of years, obesity was the ultimate symbol of wealth, fertility, and prosperity.
You see it immortalized in art, from the Venus of Willendorf figurine carved in 24,000 BC to the portraits of the Renaissance painted by Rubens.
It was an elite status symbol because only the ruling class had the resources to achieve it.
Contrast that with today, where it is heavily stigmatized in modern media, and yet it remains deeply intertwined with economics, just playing out in reverse.
Right. In developed nations, obesity is strongly correlated with economic inequality. Wealthier people are statistically thinner because they can afford the premium cost of fresh, nutritious food, the time to prepare it, and the leisure hours required for physical fitness.
But the dynamic flips when you look at developing nations where the old historical paradigm still exists.
Yes, in areas transitioning their economies, excess weight can still signal financial stability.
The dossier cites a 2023 study from Uganda showing that individuals with obesity actually had better access to financial credit.
Yeah, their weight was perceived by lenders as a visual proxy for wealth and reliability.
Globally, the financial toll of the disease itself is staggering. A 2019 Lancet Commission estimated the global economic cost of obesity at roughly $2 trillion a year.
$2 trillion?
Yeah, representing almost 3% of the world's GDP. The ripple effects touch every industry. Commercial airlines are facing massive spikes in fuel costs and are being forced to redesign seating configurations.
And the healthcare industry is pouring billions into specialized bariatric equipment, engineering wider surgical tables, and heavy-duty ambulances.
At the individual level, the economic penalty is severe too. The research documents massive employment disadvantages. On average, women with obesity earn 6% less than their ideal weight counterparts for doing the exact same jobs.
6%. It's a significant wage gap based entirely on weight.
So when you have an environment that artificially drives up a population's body weight and an economy that financially penalizes women 6% for that exact same weight gain, it's no surprise that this has sparked a massive civil rights pushback. The size acceptance movement, spearheaded by organizations like the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, or NAFA, and the International Size Acceptance Association, actively mobilizes against weight-based employment discrimination and the pervasive social stigma.
And the legal frameworks addressing this friction vary wildly depending on the jurisdiction.
What do you mean?
Well, in 2014, the European Court of Justice issued a landmark ruling stating that if morbid obesity hinders a person's full and effective participation in professional life, it can be legally classified as a disability.
Okay, so it has legal protections there.
Right. This ruling means firing an employee on those physical grounds constitutes illegal discrimination across the EU.
But the legal reality in the United States is entirely different. U.S. courts have generally rejected attempts to recognize obesity as a protected class under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Yes.
The prevailing legal argument there often hinges on the assumption that the potential public health costs and accommodations required would far exceed the benefits of extending the anti-discrimination protections.
It creates a highly complex intersection of civil rights, municipal public health policy, and sheer corporate economics.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now who might be trying to navigate your own health? With the root of the problem so deeply entrenched in our genetics, our brain chemistry, our concrete cities, and our economy, how does modern medicine actually manage this?
The clinical reality detailed in the sources is quite sobering, honestly. Historically, the primary line of defense has been lifestyle intervention.
Doctors prescribing caloric restriction and increased exercise.
Right. But the data shows the success rates for long-term weight loss maintenance using lifestyle changes alone are incredibly low. They range from just 2 to 20% over a 5-year period.
That means up to 98% of people who successfully lose weight through sheer diet and exercise will eventually regain it.
Yes.
That perfectly aligns with the hypothalamic set point mechanism we discussed earlier. The brain simply waits you out, keeping the hunger alarm blaring until you eventually break.
And the research also demystifies the diet industry. When people do manage to succeed long-term, the specific macronutrient breakdown of the diet, whether they're eating low-carb, keto, or low-fat, doesn't matter significantly in the long run.
Really?
The clinical trials show they perform similarly. The singular critical factor is adherence. It is entirely about finding a sustainable pattern you can stick to for decades.
But relying on individual willpower to fight a biological system that thinks it's starving while living in an environment engineered for overconsumption seems like an impossible task for the general public.
It's setting people up to fail.
That's why the World Health Organization emphasizes that obesity is a societal responsibility, not just an individual failure.
Exactly. They're pushing for massive upstream policy changes.
Like implementing global taxes on sugary drinks and systematically breaking up food swamps, those urban areas where communities are flooded with cheap, ultra-processed fast food and have zero access to fresh groceries.
But because environmental and individual interventions are largely failing to stem the tide, the medical field has heavily pivoted to physiological interventions.
Right.
Currently, bariatric surgery remains the most effective long-term treatment.
Procedures like a gastric bypass or a vertical sleeve gastrectomy?
Yeah, they physically alter the digestive tract. By shrinking the stomach volume, it mechanically forces caloric restriction, but more importantly, it fundamentally alters the gut hormones communicating with the brain, severely dampening the appetite.
And the outcomes show a 14 to 25% sustained weight loss at 10 years and a massive 29% reduction in all-cause mortality.
But major abdominal surgery is highly invasive and carries its own risk.
Extremely invasive, which is why the massive shift happening right now is this new wave of injectable medications. Everyone has seen the headlines about GLP-1 agonists.
Drugs like semaglutide and tirzepatide.
Yeah.
These medications are revolutionizing obesity management because they bypass willpower entirely. They work by chemically mimicking the naturally occurring satiety hormones in your gut.
So they essentially trick the brain.
Exactly. They cross the blood-brain barrier and artificially press that POMC system reset button in the hypothalamus. They turn off the fire alarm, drastically slowing gastric, emptying and silencing the constant mental chatter about food.
The weight loss results in the clinical trials are unprecedented for a medication, but the dossier explicitly notes a massive catch to this pharmaceutical revolution.
There's always a catch.
Because the medication is artificially suppressing the set point, the moment the patient stops taking the injections, the brain's original programming boots back up.
Right. The research shows people regain, on average, 50 to 70% of lost weight within just 1 year of stopping the treatment.
So these drugs are not a cure that rewires the system.
No, they are chronic treatment.
Right.
To maintain the health benefits, the patient has to stay on the medication indefinitely.
Let's synthesize all of this. What this massive stack of research makes crystal clear is that obesity is not a moral failing or a lack of character.
Absolutely not.
It is a complex chronic disease. It is the result of a violent collision between our ancient survival biology, which is beautifully designed to hoard energy and reset our weight thermostats higher to protect us from famine, and a modern world that is highly engineered for extreme physical convenience and packed with calorically dense, nutrient-poor food.
And this raises a truly profound question. If the root cause of the global obesity epidemic is our highly engineered modern environment, from our unwalkable, sprawling cities to the absolute ubiquity of subsidized ultra-processed food, what does it say about our society that our primary solutions are to surgically alter our healthy digestive tracts, or to rely on lifetime subscriptions to expensive appetite-suppressing medications, rather than doing the hard work of fixing the toxic environment we built?
We're essentially trying to medicate ourselves out of a structural trap we designed. It brings us right back to the beginning. It's exactly like using a bathroom scale to check a computer's processing speed. We are applying highly specific individual medical tools to treat a systemic environmental reality. The next time you find yourself frustrated by a diet or navigating a city that requires a car just to buy an apple, remember the invisible forces at play. Keep questioning the world around you, look closely at the environment you're moving through every day, and thank you for joining us on this deep dive.